The Billionaire's Revenge, a story of betrayal, survival, and ultimate justice. Chapter 1. The Invitation. 3 months ago, I was eating canned soup for dinner so my kids could have real food. I had $47 in my bank account, holes in my shoes, and a wedding invitation designed to humiliate me. My ex-husband invited me to watch him marry his mistress. On our anniversary, he wrote in the note, "Try to dress appropriately. I know money is tight." He expected me to show up broken, invisible, the pathetic ex-wife everyone could pity. Instead, I stepped off a billionaire's private jet in a $15,000 emerald gown, my twins holding my hands, and I watched his perfect wedding burn to the ground. But here's the thing. Getting there almost destroyed me first. My name is Rebecca Morrison, and this is the story of how I lost everything, found myself, and got the ultimate revenge on the man who tried to erase me. Stay with me, because what happened at that wedding changed everything. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. I had just finished my overnight shift at Rosie's Diner, and my feet throbbed so badly I could barely climb the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The elevator had been broken for 6 months. My landlord said he would fix it eventually. He said the same thing about the mold in my bathroom and the leak under my kitchen sink. The mailbox was stuffed with the usual collection of nightmares: electric bill, past due, phone bill, final notice, credit card statement, minimum payment impossible. But buried among all those demands was something different. A cream-colored envelope, heavy, expensive, the kind of paper that cost more than my grocery budget for a week. I knew before I looked at the return address that it was from Garrett, my ex-husband, the man who had systematically dismantled my life 4 years ago and walked away without a single consequence. The man who lived in a mansion while I counted pennies. The man who saw our children every other weekend and filled their heads with stories about how much better his life was without me. I carried the envelope upstairs like it might explode in my hands, set it on my kitchen counter between a stack of overdue notices and a jar of peanut butter that was nearly empty. My twins, Evan and Emma, were at school. I had 4 hours before my second job cleaning houses, and I should have been sleeping. Instead, I stood there staring at that envelope for 20 minutes. Finally, with trembling fingers, I tore it open. The invitation inside was everything I expected and everything I dreaded. Elegant calligraphy in gold ink, a watercolor illustration of grapevines curling around the border, thick cardstock that probably cost $10 per sheet. Garrett Michael Sullivan and Vanessa Marie Blake request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Saturday, June 15th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Black tie requested. My breath caught in my throat when I processed the date. June 15th, our anniversary. The exact day I had married Garrett 12 years ago in my grandmother's church, wearing her vintage lace veil, believing every single promise that came out of his lying mouth. He had chosen our anniversary for his wedding to the woman he had been sleeping with behind my back, the woman who had destroyed my family, the woman who smiled at me across my own kitchen table while plotting to steal my husband. There was a handwritten note tucked inside the invitation. His handwriting. I would recognize those sharp, impatient letters anywhere. Becca, the note said, I know this might seem awkward, but I really hope you will come. The kids should see both their parents moving forward with their lives. Both of us happy. No hard feelings. Right, and please try to dress appropriately. I know money has been tight for you lately. We would hate for you to feel out of place among our guests. Best, Garrett. No hard feelings. I read those 3 words over and over until they stopped making sense. No hard feelings about the affair that lasted 2 years before I found out. About the divorce that stripped me of everything I had built. About the judge who was his father's golf buddy and barely glanced at my lawyer's arguments before ruling in Garrett's favor. About the $2.3 million he hid in offshore accounts while I got $700 a month and visitation rights to my own children. No hard feelings about his mother calling me every month to remind me that I had let myself go, that I had driven her precious son into another woman's arms. that I deserved everything that happened to me. No hard feelings. I looked around my apartment with fresh eyes, the wallpaper peeling in the corner where the rain leaked through, the faucet that dripped constantly no matter how hard I tightened it, the secondhand furniture I had rescued from curbs and thrift stores, the shoes by the door that I had cut open at the toes because my children's feet were growing faster than my paycheck. I worked 2 jobs, diner waitress from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, house cleaner from 4 until 10 at night. I collapsed into bed exhausted every single day and woke up exhausted every single morning, and still I could barely keep the lights on. And Garrett wanted me at his wedding, wanted me to watch him marry his mistress on our anniversary in a venue that probably cost more than I would earn in 5 years. Something shifted inside me as I stood there holding that cream-colored invitation. For 4 years, I had accepted my fate, kept my head down, worked myself to the bone without complaining, told myself that things would get better eventually, even though they never did. For 4 years, I had been invisible. But reading his smug little note about dressing appropriately, feeling the weight of that expensive paper in my hands, something hot and sharp twisted in my chest. I was not going to throw this invitation in the trash and spend June 15th crying alone in my apartment. I was going to that wedding, but not as the poor, broken ex-wife Garrett expected to see. No, I was going to show him exactly what he had thrown away. I just had absolutely no idea how to do it. Chapter 2, The Betrayal. The memories came whether I wanted them or not. 4 years ago, almost exactly to the day, my entire world collapsed in the span of one afternoon. I was in the kitchen making dinner, spaghetti with homemade marinara sauce, Garrett's favorite meal. The twins were 4 years old, sitting in the living room playing with wooden blocks, building towers and knocking them down and shrieking with laughter. The baby monitor sat on the counter next to the stove. We still used it even though the twins were getting older because their playroom was on the opposite side of the house, and I liked being able to hear them. I was stirring the sauce when I heard Garrett's voice crackling through the speaker. He was in the nursery, on the phone. He must not have realized the monitor was still active. She is so boring now. You should see her. She completely let herself go after the pregnancies. Sweatpants every day, hair in a messy bun. I cannot remember the last time she tried to look attractive for me. I froze. The wooden spoon stopped moving in the pot. I married the wrong woman. I know that now. You are everything she is not. Ambitious, exciting, beautiful. God, you are so beautiful. My heart stopped beating. I was certain of it. Listen, as soon as I can hide enough of the assets, I am filing for divorce. My lawyer has a whole plan. She will not get anything. Trust me, babe. 6 months from now, we will be together. For real. No more sneaking around. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I heard enough. I heard her laugh. I heard her say my name in a mocking tone. I heard her call me a naive little housewife who had no idea what was coming. Vanessa Blake, my friend, the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding as a bridesmaid, the woman who came to dinner parties at my house and complimented my cooking, the woman who sat at my kitchen table drinking my wine and listening to me talk about how lucky I was to have such a wonderful husband. I should have stormed upstairs and confronted him immediately. I should have screamed and thrown things and demanded answers. But I was frozen, paralyzed by shock and denial, and the desperate, pathetic hope that somehow I had misunderstood what I heard. 2 weeks later, Garrett came home from work early. He walked into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner, loosened his tie, and looked at me with eyes that held absolutely nothing. No love, no guilt, no remorse, just cold, calculated emptiness. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words ended my life as I knew it. I want a divorce. I met someone else, someone who actually appreciates me, someone who has ambitions beyond making casseroles and changing diapers. I stared at him. My hands were shaking. The knife I had been using to chop vegetables clattered to the cutting board. "Garrett, what are you talking about? We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can fix whatever is wrong. He laughed. Actually laughed. There is nothing to fix. Becca, I do not love you anymore. I am not sure I ever did. You were convenient, safe, the kind of woman my parents approved of, but I deserve more than convenient and safe. Is it Vanessa? His expression flickered for just a moment before the mask settled back into place. That is none of your business. She was my friend. Garrett, my friend. She was never your friend. She was just waiting for me to realize that I picked the wrong woman. The divorce proceedings were a massacre. Garrett's lawyer was a senior partner at the most prestigious firm in the city. He had handled hundreds of divorces for wealthy clients. He knew exactly how to hide assets, manipulate paperwork, and destroy anyone who stood in his way. My lawyer was 3 years out of law school, young, inexperienced. The only attorney I could afford after Garrett froze all our joint accounts. Day after day, I sat in that courtroom and watched everything I had built get stripped away. The house where I had raised my children, gone. Garrett argued that it was purchased with money he earned before the marriage, even though that was a lie. The savings account where we had put money aside for the twins' college education, gone. His lawyer claimed it was a business account, not a family asset. The retirement funds, the investment properties, the vacation home on the lake where we spent every summer, gone, gone, gone. His lawyer argued that I had no career, no income, no assets in my own name. I had made the choice to be a stay-at-home mother. That was my contribution to the marriage, and apparently raising 2 children while managing an entire household was worth almost nothing in the eyes of the court. The judge barely looked at me when he made his ruling. $700 a month in child support, visitation every other weekend, nothing else. I found out 3 months later that the judge played golf with Garrett's father every single Thursday. The outcome of my divorce had been decided before I ever set foot in that courtroom. 3 weeks after the papers were finalized, I was living in my car with my children. The apartment I had found was too expensive. I could not make rent after the first month. I had nowhere to go, no family nearby, no friends who were willing to take in a broke single mother with 2 4-year-olds. So I parked behind a grocery store at 2 in the morning with Evan and Emma asleep in the back seat, and I stared at the ceiling of my car, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. My sister Diane found us the next night. She did not say a single word. She just opened the car door, pulled me into a hug, and drove us all back to her small apartment where she was already struggling to make ends meet herself. That was 4 years ago. 4 years of working 2 jobs that paid almost nothing and demanded everything. 4 years of food bank visits I hid from my children. 4 years of birthday parties I could not afford to throw, and Christmas presents I put on credit cards I could never pay off. 4 years of watching Evan and Emma go to their father's mansion every other weekend and come home talking about the pool and the game room and Vanessa's fancy sports car. 4 years of becoming invisible. And now Garrett wanted me at his wedding. I stared at that invitation until my coffee went cold. Then I picked up my phone and called my sister. Chapter 3. Rock Bottom. The morning after the invitation arrived, I went to work like I always did. 8 hours at the diner, refilling coffee cups and carrying plates and smiling at customers who looked right through me like I was not even there. Pocketing tips that would not come close to covering my electric bill. Coming home with aching feet and a sore back and just enough time to change clothes before heading out to my second job. This was my life. This was all my life had been for 4 years. But now there was a deadline. A target date circled on my mental calendar. June 15th, 3 months away. I had 90 days to figure out how to show up at Garrett's wedding and show him that he had not destroyed me, that I was still standing, that I was worth more than he ever gave me credit for. The problem was that I had no idea how to do that when I could barely afford to eat. 2 weeks after the invitation arrived, I came home from my night shift to find an eviction notice taped to my door. 3 months behind on rent, 30 days to pay or vacate the premises. I sat down on the hallway floor and cried. The twins were at Garrett's for the weekend. They were probably swimming in his heated pool, or playing video games in his finished basement, or eating gourmet meals prepared by the personal chef Vanessa insisted on hiring. And I was sitting on a dirty carpet in a hallway that smelled like mildew, holding a piece of paper that said I was about to lose even this miserable place. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Probably a scam, or a debt collector with a new number. But something made me look. The message said, "I know this is strange, but I think you dropped your wallet at the coffee shop on 5th Street this morning. I have it. Name inside says Rebecca Morrison. Let me know if you want to meet somewhere to get it back." I checked my purse. My wallet was gone. I must have left it on the counter when I was scrambling to get to work on time. I texted back, "Thank you so much. I can meet you tomorrow morning if that works." Same coffee shop. The response came immediately. "Perfect. I will be there at 8. I am Julian. By the way, that night, I slept on the couch in my moldy apartment, surrounded by bills I could not pay, clutching an eviction notice in one hand and my phone in the other. I had no idea that a lost wallet was about to change my entire life. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small black coffee, and sat in a corner booth, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. The wallet had about $12 in it, but more importantly, it had my driver's license and my debit card and the photos of my children that I carried everywhere. At exactly 8 o'clock, a man walked in. He was tall with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, well-dressed but not flashy. He looked around the shop until his eyes landed on me, and then he smiled. It was a nice smile, warm, real. Not the polished, practiced smile that Garrett used on clients and strangers. "Rebecca," I nodded. He walked over and slid into the booth across from me, placed my wallet on the table between us. I found it on the floor by the register. Everything should still be there. "I did not take anything. I promise." "Thank you. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this." He shrugged. Anyone would have done the same thing. No. I wanted to say, they would not, but I kept that thought to myself. "Can I buy you a coffee?" I asked. As a thank you, he smiled again. "Only if you let me buy yours instead." That is not how thank you works. It is how I would prefer it to work. Something about the way he said it made me laugh. An actual laugh. I could not remember the last time I had laughed at anything. We talked for an hour. His name was Julian. He was in town for business. Something vague about technology and investments. He asked me questions like he actually cared about the answers. Not about my divorce or my financial situation, because I did not mention those things. Just about me. What books did I like to read? What made me happy? What I wanted to be when I grew up. Asked like we were both still figuring that out. When I finally looked at the time, I realized I was going to be late for work. "I have to go," I said reluctantly. "Can I see you again?" I hesitated. What would a man like him want with someone like me broke, exhausted, living in a moldy apartment with an eviction notice on the door? But something in his eyes made me say yes. He called that night, and the next night, and every night after that for a week. We started meeting for coffee whenever I had a free hour, which was almost never. Then dinner at small restaurants where no one would recognize him. He seemed almost secretive about being seen in public, and I understood that. I was secretive too. I did not want Garrett finding out I was seeing someone. 3 months into whatever this was, I still did not know what Julian actually did for a living. Then everything changed. We were at a restaurant downtown, celebrating the fact that I had managed to scrape together enough money to avoid eviction for one more month. A woman at the next table gasped loudly and grabbed her husband's arm. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That is Julian Cross." I looked at Julian. Julian Cross. He closed his eyes, sighed heavily. "This is not how I wanted you to find out. Find out what that my last name is Cross? Julian Cross. Even I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Julian Cross, tech billionaire, founder of 3 major companies, One of the wealthiest men in America. I stared at him. Then I stood up and walked out of the restaurant. He caught up with me on the sidewalk. Rebecca, wait, please. You lied to me for 3 months. I did not lie. I just did not tell you everything. That is the same thing. He stepped in front of me, stopped me from walking away. Do you have any idea, he said quietly, how long it has been since someone talked to me like I was just a regular person? Since someone wanted to know what books I liked or what made me laugh, everyone wants something from me. Money, connections, access. But you just wanted coffee and conversation? I was not ready to give that up. So you let me believe you were nobody. I am nobody. I am just a guy who met a woman at a coffee shop and could not stop thinking about her. The money does not change who I am. It just changes how people treat me. I wanted to stay angry, but I understood what he meant better than he could possibly know. I did not walk away that night. And slowly, carefully, I started letting him into my life. But I still did not tell him about Garrett or the invitation or the wedding that was now only 2 months away. Not yet. Chapter 4. The evidence. Julian found out about Garrett on his own. We had been together for 4 months when I came home from work to find him sitting in my tiny living room with a look on his face that made my stomach drop. "Who is Garrett Sullivan?" he asked quietly. I froze in the doorway. "How do you know that name?" Because something did not add up. You work 2 jobs. You live in an apartment with mold on the walls. You cut the toes out of your children's shoes because you cannot afford new ones, but you were married to a millionaire for 10 years. So I had someone look into it. You investigated me. I investigated him, and I found things. Rebecca. Things you need to see. He handed me a thick manila folder. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. Bank statements showing offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. $2.3 million that Garrett had hidden during our marriage and never disclosed during the divorce. Property deeds in his mother's name for 3 houses that should have been split as marital assets. Financial records proving he had lied under oath about his income and his net worth. And at the very bottom of the stack, something that made my blood run cold. A life insurance policy, $5 million, with my name listed as the insured person, taken out 6 months before he filed for divorce, never canceled. What is this? I whispered. Julian's jaw was tight. I do not know exactly what he was planning. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. But I did not like what it implied. So I kept digging. There was more. Garrett's business was failing. He had gambling debts totaling $800,000 to people who did not accept late payments or excuses. The only thing keeping him afloat financially was his engagement to Vanessa, whose father was about to invest $50 million based on completely fraudulent financial statements. He is marrying her for her family's money, I said slowly. He is marrying her to survive, and he has been lying to everyone about everything for years. I sank down onto my second-hand couch. The springs groaned in protest. This is enough to reopen my divorce case. It is enough to send him to prison. I looked at Julian, this man who had crashed into my life and turned everything upside down. This man who had seen me at my absolute lowest and decided I was worth fighting for. Why did you do this? Why go to all this trouble? Because you deserve the truth. Because the man who did this to you deserves to face consequences. And because I am falling in love with you, and I refuse to watch you struggle when I have the power to help. I should have been angry that he had investigated my past without asking, but all I felt was overwhelming gratitude. For the first time in 4 years, someone was on my side. The next week, I took all the evidence to a lawyer. Not the cheap, inexperienced attorney I had used during my divorce. Julian insisted on paying for the best, and for once in my life. I did not argue. Jennifer Martinez was a legend in family law. She had never lost a case. She looked at the documents for 20 minutes without saying a word. Then she looked up at me and smiled. "This is extraordinary," she said. "He committed fraud, perjury, potentially criminal conspiracy. We can reopen your divorce case, and we can absolutely destroy him. How long will it take? Months? maybe a year. These things move slowly, but when we are finished, you will get everything you should have gotten 4 years ago, and possibly more. I walked out of her office feeling lighter than I had in years. I called Julian to tell him the good news. I called Diane to celebrate. For one shining moment, I actually believed that everything was going to be okay. 3 days later, Jennifer Martinez called me back. "I am so sorry," she said. Her voice was strange, flat, defeated. "I cannot represent you anymore. Why I cannot discuss the details. You need to find another attorney." She hung up before I could ask anything else. Julian made some calls. What he discovered made my blood boil. Garrett paid her off. He told me. $200,000 in a threat to expose something from her past. She is not going to help you anymore. And the evidence, someone broke into her office last night. Everything is gone. I stood in my cramped apartment surrounded by peeling wallpaper and dripping faucets and felt that brief flame of hope die out completely. Garrett knew I was coming for him, and he had already destroyed my only chance at justice. Chapter 5: The Attack. The phone call came at 2:15 on a Wednesday afternoon. "Miss Morrison, this is Principal Hendricks at Westbrook Elementary. We need you to come to the school immediately." My heart stopped. "Are my children hurt?" "They are not injured, but there has been a serious incident. Please come as quickly as you can." I ran the 6 blocks from my apartment to the school. By the time I burst through the front doors, I could barely breathe. Evan was sitting in the principal's office with a split lip and bloody knuckles. His shirt was torn. His eyes were red from crying. Another boy sat across from him, holding an ice pack to his clearly broken nose. "What happened?" I demanded. Principal Hendricks sighed heavily. "Your son assaulted Tyler Richardson during lunch. Tyler's nose is broken. His parents are threatening to press charges." I knelt down in front of my son. Evan almost never got in trouble. He was quiet and thoughtful and gentle. He organized his toys by color and cried when he accidentally stepped on bugs. "Tell me what happened," I said softly. Evan looked at me with those serious eyes that reminded me so much of myself at his age. "He was saying things about you, Mom. Bad things." "What kind of things?" He said his dad told him that you were a gold digger, that everyone knows you are broke and pathetic, that you are only with some rich guy because you cannot take care of yourself. And then he said, he stopped, swallowed hard. He said you were a whore, that his dad heard it from my dad. The word hit me like a physical blow. No 8-year-old should know that word. No child should be saying it about anyone's mother. And you hit him. I had to make him stop. He would not stop. Everyone was laughing. So I hit him. Tyler's mother burst through the door at that moment, all designer clothes and expensive perfume and righteous indignation. "I want that violent child expelled immediately." She shrieked. "My son is traumatized. We are calling our lawyers. Your son called me a whore in front of a cafeteria full of children." I said, standing up, "He is 8 years old, and he learned that word from his father, who apparently learned it from my ex-husband. If anyone should be calling lawyers, it is me." The woman's face went pale. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Your husband works with Garrett Sullivan. Does he not? Garrett has been telling everyone lies about my personal life, and your son repeated those lies at school. To my child, the principal eventually sorted things out. Both boys received detention. Tyler's parents were warned about slander. Evan was sent home for the day, but the damage was done. Garrett knew about Julian. He was spreading rumors, poisoning everyone against me. That night, after the twins were in bed, my phone rang. Garrett's number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "I hear you have been making new friends in high places," he said. His voice was ice cold. "That stops now. Call off whatever investigation you think you are running, or I will make your life a living hell. My life is already a living hell. You made sure of that. You have not seen hell yet. Beckham, I will take the children. I will tell the court you are an unfit mother. that you are sleeping with some billionaire for his money, that you are unstable and dangerous. Who do you think they will believe, a successful businessman or a broke waitress who cannot even keep mold off her bathroom walls? He hung up before I could respond. 2 days later, I was served with emergency custody papers. Garrett claimed my apartment was unsafe for children. He had photographs of the mold, the broken faucet, the cramped bedrooms. He claimed I was exposing our children to inappropriate relationships. He demanded immediate full custody pending investigation. The same judge who had ruled against me in the divorce granted his emergency motion. I had 48 hours to surrender my children. The day I drove them to Garrett's mansion was the worst day of my entire life. Emma clung to my legs, screaming, "Mommy, do not leave me. Mommy, please, do not go." Evan stood silently beside me, his chin trembling, trying so hard to be brave. Garrett stood in the doorway of his enormous house with a satisfied smirk on his face. Vanessa waved from behind him, her smile sharp and cruel. I knelt down and gathered my children in my arms, held them so tight I thought I might never let go. "I will fix this," I whispered. "I promise you. Mommy will fix this. This is not forever." I watched them walk into that house with their father and his mistress. I watched the door close behind them. Then I sat in my car outside their gates for 3 hours. Just sat there, staring at nothing, feeling my heart break into 1,000 pieces. Finally, I picked up my phone and called Julian. "I need help." I said, "I cannot do this alone anymore." "You were never alone," he replied. "Now let me show you what that means." Chapter 6. The Army Julian's compound was like nothing I had ever seen. 10 acres of manicured grounds surrounded by security fences. A mansion that made Garrett's house look like a cottage. Staff members who nodded politely as we walked through the front doors into a foyer bigger than my entire apartment. I had never been there before. Julian had always come to me, respecting my need to keep our worlds separate. But separation was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Jennifer Martinez is out of the picture," Julian said as we sat in his study. "But I found someone better. Sarah Chen is the most feared family law attorney on the East Coast. She has never lost a custody case, and she cannot be bought." "How do you know she cannot be bought?" "Because she is already worth $80 million. And because her ex-husband tried to take her children 20 years ago, using exactly the same tactics Garrett is using on you. She has dedicated her entire career to destroying men like him." Sarah Chen was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could cut through steel. She reviewed my case over a video call that same night. "Your children were removed from your care based on fraudulent claims presented to a corrupt judge," she said. "We have grounds to challenge the emergency order, but we need evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence. The evidence was stolen. Then we find new evidence, better evidence, from sources they cannot silence." The first source came forward 2 days later. His name was Marcus Webb. He was Garrett's business partner and had been for 15 years. He reached out to Julian through encrypted channels, terrified of being discovered. "I have documentation of everything." He told us when we met at a secure location. Financial fraud, tax evasion, hidden assets. "I have been keeping records for years, waiting for the right moment to come forward." "Why did you wait so long?" "He has photographs of me with someone who is not my wife. He threatened to destroy my marriage and my reputation if I ever talked." "What changed?" "I watched what he did to your children, ripping them away from their mother just to hurt you, using them as weapons. I cannot stay silent anymore. I have 2 daughters of my own. If someone did this to their mother, I would want someone to speak up." Marcus gave us everything. Years of documentation, emails, financial records, even recordings of Garrett openly bragging about how he had cheated me in the divorce. But he was not our only ally. 3 days before my custody hearing, Julian received an unexpected phone call. "That was Patricia Sullivan," he said when he hung up. His face was a mask of disbelief. "Garrett's mother. She hates me. She says she wants to help you." Patricia arrived at Julian's compound the following afternoon. She looked decades older than I remembered. Tired, defeated, like someone who had spent years carrying a burden she could no longer bear. "Rebecca," she said, "I owe you an apology that I can never adequately give. Of all the things I expected, those words were not among them. I was horrible to you during your marriage, and worse after the divorce. I blamed you for everything because it was easier than admitting that my son was the problem. I pushed him toward Vanessa because I thought she was better for him, wealthier family, better social connections. I was so terribly wrong. Why are you here now? Why tell me this? Because I have watched my son become a monster, and I am tired of helping him hide it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. "This is security footage from their house, from 4 years ago, during your marriage. What kind of footage? The kind that shows exactly who my son really is." That night, Julian and I watched the footage together. It showed Garrett screaming at me in our bedroom, throwing a glass against the wall inches from my head, backing me into corners with his fists raised, and in one devastating clip, slapping me so hard that I fell to the floor. I had buried those memories so deep that I had almost convinced myself they never happened. But there it was, documented, undeniable. "He saved this footage himself," I whispered. "Why insurance?" Patricia replied. "In case I ever tried to divorce his father, he was afraid I would tell people what he learned about marriage from watching us. You kept it all these years. I kept it because I knew someday someone would need proof of who he really is. I hoped it would not be you, but here we are." There was more. Patricia had evidence that Vanessa was neglecting my children. Videos secretly recorded by the household staff showing Emma crying for hours while Vanessa scrolled through social media. Audio of Vanessa screaming at Evan that he was pathetic and worthless, just like his mother. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in a guest room in Julian's mansion and stared at the ceiling and let myself feel something I had not allowed myself to feel in 4 years. Hope. Chapter 7. The hearing, the courtroom felt different this time. Different building, different judge, different everything. Judge Eleanor Hayes was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and reading glasses that she peered over like a hawk examining prey. She had a reputation for protecting children above all else, and she looked at Garrett like she could see straight through every lie he had ever told. Sarah Chen stood beside me, radiating quiet confidence. Julian sat in the gallery, his presence a steady anchor. Diane gripped my hand so tightly I thought my fingers might break. "Your Honor," Sarah began, "my client's children were removed from her custody based on fraudulent claims submitted to a judge who had personal connections to the petitioner's family. We have substantial evidence of corruption, perjury, and a systematic abuse of the family court system." Garrett's lawyer jumped up to object. Judge Hayes silenced him with a single raised hand. Sarah presented her case methodically. First, the nanny's testimony and video evidence showing neglect of the children in Garrett's home. Emma crying for her mother while Vanessa ignored her. Evan being screamed at for minor infractions. Then Marcus Webb's financial documentation proving fraud, hidden assets, and perjury during the original divorce proceedings. And finally, Patricia's security footage. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as they watched Garrett shove me against a wall, watched him raise his fist, watched him slap me across the face while I cowered. I did not look at the screen. I did not need to see it again. I had lived it. Instead, I watched the faces of the people watching. The shock, the disgust, the dawning realization of who Garrett Sullivan really was. When the footage ended, Judge Hayes removed her glasses and stared directly at Garrett for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Mr. Sullivan," she said finally. "Do you have anything to say in response to this evidence?" His lawyer tried to speak, but Garrett was frozen. His face had gone from confident to desperate in the span of 30 minutes. Judge Hayes made her ruling. Custody is immediately and permanently returned to the mother. "Mr. Sullivan is prohibited from any unsupervised contact with his children until a full investigation is completed and appropriate therapy has been undertaken. Additionally, I am forwarding all evidence presented today to the District Attorney's Office. What I have witnessed suggests criminal conduct that extends far beyond the jurisdiction of family court. I got my children back that same afternoon. When Evan and Emma ran into my arms outside the courthouse, I dropped to my knees and held them like I would never let go. Emma sobbed into my shoulder. Even Evan, my stoic little man, had tears streaming down his face. "You came back for us," Emma whispered. "I will always come back for you. Always." That night, we had dinner at Julian's house, all of us together. Diane brought champagne and sparkling cider for the children. Julian attempted to cook pasta and failed spectacularly. The twins explored every room like they had discovered a magical castle. For one beautiful evening, I let myself believe that the nightmare was finally over. I should have known better. 3 days later, Julian's security team intercepted a package at my apartment door. Inside was a stuffed teddy bear addressed to Emma, a gift, supposedly, from Vanessa. But hidden in the stuffing of that innocent-looking toy were 3 clear bags of cocaine. Someone was trying to frame me, plant drugs in my home, get me arrested and lose my children forever. Julian's face was carved from stone when he showed me the evidence. "This ends now," he said. "At his wedding, in front of everyone he has ever tried to impress, we are going to destroy him." I looked at that teddy bear, at the drugs that were supposed to send me to prison, at the lengths Garrett was willing to go to win. Yes, I agreed. We end this at his wedding. Chapter 8, Preparation. The plan came together over the next 3 weeks. Marcus would approach Vanessa's father during the wedding reception with evidence of Garrett's financial fraud. Richard Blake was about to invest $50 million in a business built entirely on lies. He deserved to know the truth before he lost everything. Sarah Chen was coordinating with the district attorney. They had been building a criminal case against Garrett for weeks, gathering additional evidence, interviewing witnesses. The wedding would be the perfect moment to serve the arrest warrant. Maximum public humiliation for maximum impact. Patricia would be there, ready to support whatever happened. She had made her choice to abandon her son, and there was no going back. And I would walk into that wedding looking like everything Garrett ever told me I was not. The dress shopping was Diane's idea. "We are doing this right," she declared. No arguments. The boutique was the kind of place I would never have dared enter before. Everything white and hushed and smelling like expensive perfume. The saleswoman looked at my worn shoes and Target purse with barely disguised contempt. Then Diane casually mentioned Julian's name, and suddenly we were being treated like visiting royalty. I tried on dress after dress. Nothing felt right. Too flashy, too modest, too desperate. And then I saw it, an emerald green gown hanging in the corner. Simple and elegant, with clean lines that made me look taller and more powerful than I had ever felt. The color was a deep, rich jewel tone. The exact shade that Garrett had always said washed me out, made me look tired, emphasized all the wrong things. I put it on and looked in the mirror. For a moment, I did not recognize the woman staring back at me. "That is the one," Diane whispered. "That is absolutely the one. It cost more than my monthly rent. Julian already paid for it. What he called the boutique last week. Told them to let you pick whatever you wanted. His treat. I should have argued, should have insisted on paying for it myself somehow. But looking at that reflection, at that woman who looked confident and strong and beautiful, I just nodded. Okay, I will take it." The morning of the wedding, Diane arrived at my apartment at 7 o'clock. "We have a lot of work to do," she announced, carrying bags of makeup and hair products and enough styling tools to open a salon. She spent 4 hours transforming me, hair styled in soft waves that cascaded over my shoulders, makeup that made my eyes look larger and brighter and hid the dark circles from years of exhaustion, nails painted a deep red that matched my newfound confidence. When she was finished, I barely recognized myself. "You look like a movie star," Diane said softly, "like someone who owns the world." I feel like an imposter. You are not an imposter. You are exactly who you were always meant to be. Garrett just spent years trying to convince you otherwise. Julian arrived at noon with the twins dressed in their finest clothes. Emma wore a pale blue dress with tiny flowers embroidered along the hem. Evan wore a miniature suit that made him look like a tiny businessman. They both stared at me with wide eyes. "Mom," Emma breathed. "You look like a princess." "You look really pretty," Evan added shyly. Julian just stood there for a moment, taking me in. "You are stunning," he finally said. "Absolutely stunning." The drive to the private airport took 20 minutes. The twins pressed their faces against the windows the entire time, marveling at everything. When they saw the jet, their jaws dropped. It was not the largest plane Julian owned, he told me later, but it was impressive enough. Cream leather seats, polished mahogany accents, a flight attendant who offered champagne before we had even buckled our seatbelts. Diane settled into one of the oversized seats and grinned broadly. "I could definitely get used to this lifestyle," she announced. I sat by the window and watched the ground fall away as we lifted into the sky. In 3 hours, I would face the man who had destroyed me. I would walk into his wedding in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress and show him exactly what he had lost. I was terrified. I was ready. Julian took my hand and squeezed gently. "You do not have to do this," he reminded me. "We could handle everything through lawyers. You do not have to see him." I looked at him, this man who had changed everything, who had believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. "Yes," I said, "I do have to do this. I need him to see." Chapter 9, The Wedding. The venue was a vineyard estate in Napa Valley, rolling hills covered in row after row of grapevines, white tents billowing gently in the afternoon breeze, flowers everywhere, a string quartet playing classical music for guests who wandered the grounds with champagne glasses in hand. Everything was tasteful and expensive and designed to showcase Garrett's success. Our motorcade of 3 black SUVs pulled up to the entrance just as the ceremony was about to begin. Guests milling about turned to stare. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. The first door opened. Julian stepped out, adjusting his perfectly tailored jacket, looking like he had just walked off the cover of a magazine. Then he turned and offered me his hand. I took a breath, stepped out of the car. The emerald dress caught the afternoon sunlight and seemed to glow. The diamonds at my ears sparkled like stars. My hair moved gently in the breeze. I stood straight and tall, my twins holding my hands on either side. Julian a steady presence behind me. The whispers started immediately. "Is that Rebecca Morrison? Who is that man with her? Wait, is that Julian Cross? The Julian Cross. Did she just arrive in a private jet? She looks incredible." I smiled serenely and walked forward, one foot in front of the other, head high, shoulders back, like I owned the entire world. The wedding planner rushed toward us, flustered and confused. "I am so sorry," she stammered. "There seems to be some confusion. I do not see additional guests on the list. Rebecca Morrison +4, I said calmly. "My children, my sister, and my partner." She fumbled with her tablet. Mr. Sullivan only noted Rebecca Morrison. "I am not sure where to seat everyone." Julian spoke, his voice quiet but somehow carrying across the entire area. "I am sure you can accommodate us. It would be a shame if there were any problems on such an important day." The planner's eyes widened with recognition. Her entire demeanor shifted instantly. "Yes, of course. Please, follow me." We were led to seats near the back, clearly an attempt to minimize our visibility. It did not matter. Every single person at that wedding was already staring at us. Garrett stood at the altar, dressed in an expensive tuxedo, talking to his best man. He glanced toward the commotion at the entrance. Our eyes met across the crowd. I watched his face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, confusion, anger, fear. I smiled at him, just smiled. He looked away first. The ceremony was beautiful if you could ignore the rot at its foundation. Vanessa walked down the aisle in a designer gown that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. She looked radiant, happy, completely unaware of what was coming. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and partnership, about building a life together, about promises that were meant to last forever. I sat through all of it without flinching. When the minister asked if anyone knew a reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, I did not move, did not speak. I just kept smiling. Garrett stumbled over his vows. His voice cracked. He kept glancing back at me like I was a ghost he could not escape. He had every reason to be afraid. At the reception, everything began to unravel. Marcus approached Richard Blake, Vanessa's father, during the cocktail hour. I watched from across the manicured lawn as Richard's expression transformed from polite confusion to mounting fury. He pulled Vanessa aside, showed her something on his phone. Her face went pale. Then Richard confronted Garrett in front of everyone. "You are a con artist," Richard shouted. His voice echoed across the reception. "My daughter trusted you. My family was about to invest $50 million in your fraudulent business. You have been lying to everyone from the moment you met her." Vanessa was crying now. "Daddy, what are you saying? What is happening?" Richard showed her more documents, bank statements, emails, proof of every lie. She turned to Garrett, her face twisted with betrayal. "You told me you loved me. You said Rebecca was the problem, that she held you back, that she did not appreciate you. But you were the problem all along. You were lying to me from the beginning." Then Patricia Sullivan stood up. The entire reception fell silent. She walked slowly to the microphone at the front of the main tent. She looked tired but determined. "I have stayed silent for far too long," she said. "My son is not just a liar and a fraud. He is dangerous." She signaled to someone at the back. The projection screen behind the head table flickered to life. Security footage played for everyone to see. Garrett screaming at me, shoving me against a wall, slapping me across the face. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some people got up and left immediately. Others filmed on their phones. Garrett stood frozen in the middle of his own reception, watching his carefully constructed life collapse around him. And then the police arrived. Two uniformed officers walked through the parting crowd. "Garrett Sullivan," one of them announced, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit a felony. You have the right to remain silent." Garrett tried to run. Julian stepped directly into his path. "You should have left her alone," Julian said quietly. Then he threw a single, perfect punch. Garrett crumpled to the ground. The officers handcuffed him right there, in his wedding tuxedo, in front of every person he had ever tried to impress. As they dragged him toward the waiting police car, he twisted around to look at me. Pure hatred burned in his eyes. "This is not over," he snarled. "When I get out, I will destroy you." I walked toward him slowly, calmly, completely in control. I leaned down until I was close enough that only he could hear me. "You already tried to destroy me," I said quietly. "You failed. And now everyone knows exactly who you really are." I straightened up and turned my back on him. I did not look back as they took him away. Chapter 10, The Beginning. The aftermath of the wedding was glorious chaos. Richard Blake withdrew his $50 million investment immediately and filed a lawsuit against Garrett for fraud. Vanessa stood alone in the middle of the reception, abandoned by her new husband and her own family within an hour of saying "I do." She approached me before I left. "You planned this," she hissed. "You destroyed everything." I looked at her. This woman who had pretended to be my friend while sleeping with my husband, who had smiled at me across my own dinner table while plotting to steal my life. "I did not destroy anything," I said calmly. "I just told the truth. You destroyed your own future 4 years ago when you chose to wreck my family for your own ambition. This is simply karma finally catching up." I walked away without looking back. The divorce case was reopened within a month, with new evidence, a new judge, and Garrett facing criminal charges. everything changed. I received full compensation for the hidden assets, the properties that should have been divided, the retirement funds, the college savings. Everything that was stolen from me was finally returned. Garrett was convicted on 12 counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in federal prison. His assets were seized. His reputation was destroyed. Everything he had built on lies crumbled to nothing. Vanessa was disowned by her family. Last I heard, she was working at a department store in another state, living in a studio apartment, stripped of everything she thought she had won by stealing my husband. Patricia and I developed an unexpected relationship. She was not trying to replace anything, just trying to make amends for years of cruelty. She saw her grandchildren regularly now. She was a different woman than the one who had tormented me during my marriage. 1 year after the wedding, I stood in the kitchen of my new house. It was not a mansion, just a comfortable 4-bedroom home with a big backyard and a swing set and room for the twins to grow. I had bought it with my own money. Money I had earned and money I had recovered. It was mine. Julian was at the stove attempting to make pancakes. He had gotten better over the year, but the results were still questionable. Diane sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, watching her own children play with Evan and Emma in the backyard. The twins burst through the door, the golden retriever puppy we had adopted bounding behind them. "Mom," Emma shouted, "can we go to the park after breakfast after you eat? And after Julian figures out how not to burn everything." I heard that. Julian called from the stove. "You were supposed to?" Diane laughed and shook her head. "You two are disgustingly cute together." "You know that I know," I said, smiling, "and I love it." Later that day, after the park and lunch and homework and all the beautiful chaos of ordinary life with children, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Julian came out and settled into the chair beside me. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. The invitation, the destruction, the rock bottom, the climb back up. And now I know something I did not understand before. What is that?" I looked at him, this man who had crashed into my life and changed everything, who had believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. My worth was never determined by those who could not see it. Garrett spent 10 years making me feel small, making me believe I was not enough, and I let his voice become my voice. I paused, watching the last light fade from the sky. But he was wrong. I was always enough. I just forgot for a while. Julian took my hand and held it gently. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I always saw your value. From the very first moment. I know. That is why I love you." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, I found an envelope in the day's mail. The return address was the federal penitentiary. Garrett's handwriting. I opened it slowly. "This is not over." The letter read, "When I get out, I am coming for everything you took from me. Everything. Enjoy your happiness while it lasts." I read the words twice. Then I walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Let him try. I had spent 4 years being afraid, being small, being invisible. Never again. If you are listening to this story and you are where I was 4 years ago, broken and believing you deserve nothing, I need you to hear something important. Your worth was never defined by those who could not see it. You are enough. You have always been enough. And your story is not over. The best chapter has not been written yet. Keep fighting. Keep surviving. Keep thriving. You have got this. The end. Kernikanon. Epilogue. 3 years later, Rebecca Morrison founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping survivors of financial abuse and divorce. She used her settlement money to provide legal representation for women who could not afford it, ensuring that what happened to her would not happen to anyone else. Julian Cross married her on a spring afternoon in the backyard of their home, with Evan and Emma standing beside them as ring bearer and flower girl. The twins are thriving. Evan is at the top of his class in mathematics. Emma has won 3 art competitions. Garrett Sullivan was released after serving 5 years of his 7-year sentence for good behavior. He now lives in a small apartment in another state, working as a bookkeeper for a company that has no idea about his past. Vanessa Blake never recovered financially or socially. The last anyone heard, she was still working retail. Patricia Sullivan passed away peacefully 2 years after the wedding. Her final act was establishing a trust fund for her grandchildren's education. And Rebecca finally learned to believe what Julian had seen in her from the beginning, that she was extraordinary, that she was worthy, that she had always been enough.